Episode 96, August 9 to 30, 1915. I had to shoot my friends. Insane Carnage on a Gallipoli farm by Digger Craven. Read by Tim Pearce. Here is a grim account of insane carnage on the Peninsula by Digger Craven, whose earlier reminiscences related to W.S. Blackledge appeared in episode 76. In 4 days and 3 nights of fighting, 16,000 men were lost. In this chapter, this ANZAC private relates how, in order to save his wounded friends from a horrible death in a blazing scrub, he was compelled to shoot them. By heavens, I believe they've got it. Red looked like nothing on earth. He was incredibly dirty, splashed with rubble and dust, and his eyes were almost as red as his hair. I suppose we're all in much the same case, but the news that came down to us on the lower slopes that the summit had been taken heartened us beyond measure. It might be another of those rumours, but we were ready to believe anything then. Even as we staggered over the ruined fields of the farm, they were ploughed up as if a giant tractor had passed over them. We became aware of the intensified struggle up and beyond us. The fire increased. We could hear again the wild cries of the Osmanlis, the weird bleating yells of breathless men calling their maker. All was not well up there. Something had misfired. We would learn that after our own cannon had blasted the advance column, the victors who had reached the summit, the Turks turned on the remnants, slaughtered them unmercifully, beat them back over the top and down again. In that early morning light, we were witnesses of the most ghastly struggle. Men were at death grips with each other, a score of deadly duels, 100 individual scraps, while back and back our men fell. The Turks broke through them. They were lost to view, crushed, trampled, literally swept to death by the massed hordes that now came over the hill and down toward the farm. Away on the southwestern section of the ridge, the line held, but in front of us, in the vicinity of the farm, there began the bloodiest battle of the whole campaign. It went on throughout the whole of that fateful 9th of August. Attack after attack was repulsed. But the Muslim fanatics, the Turks and their Arab brethren, came on again and again, gathering force in this frightful conflict for a hilltop. Slithering and stumbling about the slopes, we fought through the whole of that accursed day, from the eerie light of early morn till darkness fell over us like a dropped curtain. We had been fighting for 3 days and 3 nights. We were weary beyond human conception. In all, we were some 5,000 men on Ch15 and within a quarter of a mile of its summit at the farm. And against us were the Turks' reinforcements, some 15,000 men. They descended upon us in a dense, black, screaming mass, so thickly ranked that they could advance soldier to soldier and 6 to 8 deep. They came and we sprayed them with machine gun bullets, threw bombs in the packed mass, tore gaps into them with volley after volley of rifle fire. From our miserable holes and bits of breastworks we annihilated their advance line. Then we rose to meet the second with bayonets, knives and trenching tools, cut and battered them to bits despite their overwhelming superiority of numbers. The din of battle was deafening. The cries of infuriated men, the scream of shells, the hoarse, blood-curdling speech of a bunch of mules blown to pieces, the stuttering crackle of machine guns, and the raucous bawling of those Osmanlis who came into battle with Allah on their lips, all created an inferno of sound, a tumultuous uproar that is past belief. They came on us in storming ways. The third line broke us, forced us back on our pitiful apology for trenches, leapt into our holes, and hacked right and left into a confused jumble of destruction and death. The remnants fell back into the second line of trenches, rallied, stiffened, fired into the charging wall of men, killing and wounding hundreds in a deathly haul of musketry. But we could not hold them. Nothing could stop that dense multitude. We were thrust out again, but not beaten. Men formed in groups and charged, rallied again and again, forced the mass to waver, to stand and fight, struggling and striving, body to body. Giant round bombs bounded into our lines, burst, sent a shower of steel in all directions. Thereafter, bloody massacre around the farm of Ch15, that no man who was there and survived will ever forget. The story of that grim plateau and the nullahs surrounding it, which for years afterwards were found to be thigh-deep with whitening human bones, is one that can never be told in anything like comprehensive detail. Every man's view was different, for each saw in it only that which within his own little orbit. When the British force rallied on that historic ground, all organised formations had disappeared. Brigades which had been split up, almost annihilated, became a confusion of units. Companies were intermixed. English, Scots, Irish, Indian, New Zealanders, Aussies and Turks were inextricably commingled in an insanguine free-for-all melee that has no parallel in military history. The losses in officers, from generals downwards, who fought side by side with the troops were terrible. But the men fought on in groups, dropping their scientific weapons and flying at each other's throats. The imagination boggles at such an insane vision. Momentarily it had ceased to be a war. We clutched at each other then, fiends out of hell, no longer human, Christians and Muslims, in a wild and reckless abandon of rough housing. Nothing in the world is as loathsome as the sight of human beings who have forgotten they are human beings. It is no mere expression to say we caught one another by the throat. We rolled about the dirt locked in death grips. We used stones, knives, bayonets, clubs, even fists, hurled ourselves upon one another in a fiendish bestiality. And the hullabaloo we set up was the concerted snarling of wild beasts in the jungle around the farm. In spite of the appalling odds against us, Johnny Turk was beaten to a standstill. He could drive us no further down. He went back to his point of vantage on the crest of the ridge. He left thousands of dead and dying all over the hillsides, but their hilltop was still his. 4 days and 3 nights of wholesale slaughter had availed us nothing. We had to let him retire up the hill because we could not climb any more. We beat at his stragglers, clubbed them to death, bayoneted them behind as they turned from the hideous maniacal conflict. I saw men wielding rifles like clubs, saw their foaming mouths, heard their shrill laughter. We did not drive Johnny from the farm. He forsook it as if it was some plague spot peopled by the raging spirits of darkness. We too forsook the farm. It was left to the dead and the dying and the carnivorous birds of the air. Chinook and its road to victory was not for us. We had fought from Friday night to Tuesday evening in a wilderness of tangled scrub and precipitous rock and innumerable gullies, in blazing sun and in pitch darkness, without rest, with very little food and an appalling lack of water, on hills of fire and crags that rotted to our tread. And in all that effort of pain and blood and sweat and wasted gallantry, we gained not a single position of tactical or strategical importance. We knew that the Turks were shaken, that another battle would break them, but we were too fed, too sullen, too exhausted to care what happened then. We had neither guns, men, nor munitions for further effort. We had lost 16,000 men, killed, wounded and missing. All that dreadful night of the 10th we lay in the dirt, sleeping by fits and starts, listening sometimes to the incessant rumble and clatter of the moving column in the valley below us, not a column on the march, but a long column of wounded and stricken being conveyed down the line. To be wounded meant to be seriously wounded, for none of us had escaped wounds of one kind or another. We were all of us scarred and blood-smeared and incredibly filthy. For days afterwards, we lived in trenches and regiments of dead. We ate, drank and slept among them, for the reconstruction of our lines was a Herculean task, and there were so few in the grand total to tackle it. The dead, British, Arab, Turk and Indian, were with us so long that we came to know them. In the daily activities of the trench warfare which followed, while carrying rations, water and ammunition, we would pass bays of broken trenches where the dead must be left to rot until enough men could be rounded up to remove them. One knew those crumpled shapes. They were always black with flies. One came to recognise them, the grotesqueness of a rump, an arm, a head, the torn and tattered scraps of rags left by the rodents. These regiments of dead lay not merely over no man's land, but sprawled horribly on the parapets along the whole front, heaped up like logs in places, in others lying half in half out of the trenches. It is one thing to have several thousands of men slain in battle, but quite another to get rid of their bodies. And it seemed as if we had them all, Johnny's as well as our own. All through the sweltering days we would look up and see them there. As the trenches were deepened and strengthened, many of them were buried under the earth that was thrown out. And that was pretty grim, even for Gallipoli. Moreover, the ever busy Turkish snipers made it impossible for us to do much with those that looked uninvited over the parapets. We had to get them with our periscope rifles and keep a section of the enemy busy, while others removed these things that seemed to stare down on us with their sightless eyes, reproachfully maybe, and caused the most callous of us to break into nervous sweats. Nights were nights of horror. There were burial fatigues. We had to drag them away from the lines at dead of night, often under fire, and cover them hastily with a few scrapings of earth. Johnny Turk was somewhat chastened during the few days that followed the big battle. We were labouring through the nights at burying the bodies. It was hellish work, but it was even more hellish to have them staring at us. We went to it careless of sleep or rest. We must get rid of the flies and the stench and the creeping horror of it all. It was eerie work. We took turns at heaving them out of holes we wanted to use in other holes we didn't want and could hastily fill in. Many of them in the open graveyard of no man's land had to stay there, but in the immediate neighbourhood of the trenches we worked like galley slaves night after night. We used gas masks, but found them too hot and too stifling. Besides, they seemed to carry the smell of the dead within them, or was it that we had the stench in our lungs and couldn't get it out? We came upon old pals then, fellows we'd known for months. We hardly recognised them. They had turned black, reeked, were hideous, and the creatures that fed their shot away even as we tumbled them into crude graves. A man would lift his foot angrily at the fleeing rat and blaspheme that one's own powers should be reduced to carry on meat in so short a time. After that, there were a few days of respite for soul-weary men, so that we were able for a few hours each day to slip down to the beach, shed our filthy clothes, and dive into the cleansing waters of the sea. It was heavenly. I, naturally, kept a wary eye on the bursting shells. I didn't want another packet like the last one, or the mob would be saying I did it on purpose. Then came another red date, another break from the monotony of trench life. It seemed there were gaps between us and the line at Suvla. We had the trifling task of capturing the Turkish stronghold on Hill 60. Once that was accomplished, the line from ANZAC to Suvla would be impregnable, and then we could settle down to the less strenuous game of trench warfare again. We knew our Hill 60, but anything for a change. Hill 60 was never taken. After all the lessons and experiences and fiascos and disasters of the Peninsula, the attacking force was called upon to open this crazy offensive by crossing the wide plain of an exposed valley, continually swept by the enemy's guns from higher ground, and in broad daylight. It was the last straw. Hill 60 was a low, flat-topped mound girdled by trenches at the summit. In an attempt to take this position, the South Wales Borderers, Connaught Rangers, a Gurkha brigade, old campaigners and men of the new army, cooperated with the New Zealand and Australian contingents. After a preliminary bombardment by the artillery, at about 3 of a blazing afternoon, the force went forward in 3 waves, advancing across an open valley under terrific heat haze and loaded with picks and shovels in addition to the usual weight of equipment. We must have carried not less than 40 pounds weight on our backs. How long, O Lord, how long? Red could still grin as we ran, dodged, doing a double at the crouch, while shells whistled and wailed and exploded and filled great spaces with blackness, clods of earth, falling fragments. They came over with the shriek of all the devils in hell. Bombs, enormous fellows, bounced towards us, ricocheting and careering crazily, exploding with deafening roar. Streaks of glare from the shells shot through thick haze and kicked up dust. Bullets from rifle and machine gun droned and piped over us. The automatic guns opened up on us before we had gone a few yards. We dropped, fired in a few rounds, then up again, pushing another yard or two. It is damned hard fighting in the open and in broad daylight, especially when your enemy is securely trenched. They swept our advance liners with swathe of some gigantic scythe. Clouds of dense smoke hung heavy on the haze of that hot afternoon. In a measure, it saved a great number of us. Just the same, men were dropping like rotten sheep all over the place. A score of times we dashed for cover in that monstrous charge, using boulders, clumps of scrub, dead men, anything, anywhere for a breather. For as much as a whole minute at a time would stop, crouching low while officers yelled themselves hoarse. Critics may say that they like about this insane attack on Hill 60, but the fact was there was no heart in the troops anymore. They were through. When a fellow stood up to his full height and ran into it, we knew he was fed up with it all and wanted to go home. Hundreds did during that sunny afternoon. Hill 60 was anticlimax, and every man knew it was. Of all the death traps, this was the biggest. Men muttered and cursed in the desolation of this hopelessness. If I ever get out of this, I'll be court-martialed before I'll stand to for another. Red's face looked awful as he muttered those words. His face was grey and haggard, scarred and patched with dry blood. Even his red hair had ceased to bristle. His eyes were dull. This giant of a man was now just an elongated framework of bones on which his clothes hung. Even in the middle of all the blood and filth of battle, I could still look towards Red. We were never far apart. Instinct kept us close. It seemed we had been together for years, in and out of trenches, chasing Johnny or being chased, and always with that tumultuous roar of fire. He had an idea that if we ever got separated, it would be the end of us. That's why I didn't believe Red when, in the heat of that unholy scramble, he growled about desertion rather than face another spot. We were crouching under a little ridge topped with bush. In half an hour there wasn't any more left of that first wave of men who had charged Johnny's trenches. It was as if they had ever been. Every man jack of them was gone from our view, killed or captured or lying wounded in front of those accursed ditches which bristled with rifles and machine guns. There were only the smashed and the dying. Then the shells started burning up the scrub again, and what worried us in that third wave of the advance was that the fire was spreading, crawling and crackling over the earth like some prairie fire. We'd seen some fires during that campaign, Red and I, dashed through a few of them, but this one topped them all. The scrub and undergrowth was as dry as tinder. The fire licked its way over vast areas of the ground. The men in front were caught in the flames. It was spreading fanwise over the lower slopes of the hill. It crawled over the earth like some evil thing, a holocaust come to convince us. Did we need any convincing? That we might better ourselves forever against these fiery mounds of Gallipoli, and we should better in vain. We stared in horror at that expanding carpet of fire. We saw wounded men crawling and scrambling from the flames, and as they got clear of the fire, they were shot dead by jeering Turks. Those who were too badly wounded to make the attempt were burned alive. The stench of it all hung on the thick haze. Volumes of smoke rose until it seemed that all the world was afire. Coming atop of all the other reverses and repulses and defeats, that overspreading fire rendered us helpless and hopeless, destroyed utterly the last remnants of faith and confidence, brought the final touch of despair to war-sickened and weary men. Everybody knew we should never gain the summit of Hill 60. Our disillusionment was complete. The fire not only changed the face of the earth, it changed everything and that little world in front of ANZAC. But at least we had the satisfaction of knowing that we'd put some of our comrades out of their misery. How could we lie there, a little party adrift under a ridge, and watch those fellas burned alive? To see them squirming and struggling to get clear of the licking flames, to hear their screams, it was more than we could stand. We took aim. Even as the flames licked about them, setting fire to their clothing. God forgive us, muttered Red. His bloodshot eyes were wet. I'm not ashamed to admit that mine were too. I'd seen many die in all sorts of weird ways, but never like that. Even where we lay, some 400 yards away, we could feel the singeing heat of that ghastly fire. Men swore that the ground had been prepared, that Johnny Turk had been out at night with a hose of petrol, gushing a stream over the crackly scrub and bush. Certainly it blazed with intense ferocity, travelling over the ground like liquid fire. So swiftly did it spread, destroying everything in its trail, leaving a vast parched blackness, over which could be seen those who had failed to escape, blackened, smouldering heaps of debris, broken rifles with charred butts, tangles of rag ash that had once been, a long time ago. uniforms with buttons and insignia of regiment industriously polished. For what? To become these little heaps of black dust. Things stood out over that burned-out waste: tarnished metal, jags and strips of shell, tangled wire, rifles, bayonets, entrenching tools, little heaps of cartridge cases, where men had lain or crouched to fire, where they had died at their posts and left nought but these telltale bits and pieces to mark their passage.
Goodbye, goodbye, when the tree may be dear from your eye, though it's hard to part, I know. I'll be gentle to death, I know. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. But swallowed thin, chilly old chin-chin, now pull toodle-oo, goodbye. Brother Bertie went away to do his bit the other day, with a smile on his lips and his lieutenant lips upon his shoulder, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he said, "Remember me to all the birds," though he wagged his paw and went away to war, shouting out these pathetic words. Goodbye, goodbye, when the tear may be dear from your